Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Emily Gilbert, and I'm joined by my colleague Rosie Haneke, and we are going to be presenting Basics of Building a Search Strategy, Part 1, Creating an Initial Search in PubMed. This is part of our ongoing spring semester series in the library on the different components of systematic reviews. And so we are just going to dive in because we have a lot to talk about. So Rosie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Rosie. I am the head librarian for information services at the Library of the Health Sciences, and I am the systematic reviews librarian at UIC.
And I am an assistant professor and liaison librarian, and my liaison area is College of Medicine. So if you would do us a favor, please, we do have a ton to go through. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have questions, please jot them down. And we will use whatever time we have left at the end to answer questions. Of course, if we don't get to your question, you can always email us later and we will definitely get you an answer. And also, this presentation is being recorded and you will get the link in an email in the next couple of days after. And what we will be talking about today, first, we're going to discuss the underlying principles of a systematic review search. Then we'll talk about the steps of developing a search strategy for systematic review. And finally, we will explore PubMed as a starting point for building a search string. And that includes a discussion of harvesting, grouping, and testing search terms. So let's dive right in with how to approach a systematic review search. So a systematic review search, if you'll bear with our fishing metaphor here, is very different than a typical search you might do. If you just need to find a few articles on a topic that you're doing a presentation on, or you're just doing like a really casual paper or something, or an editorial or something like that. So a typical search is akin to the fly fishing picture, where you are going after something precise, and you can try multiple times to find what it is you're looking for. A systematic review search, on the other hand, is broad in nature, and the intention is to get as much as you can in one single go. That is to ensure transparency and reproducibility. And there is always this push and pull with precision and recall. And that's in any search, honestly. You kind of have to choose whether you're going to prioritize one or the other or try to find a balance in between. But when you are designing a systematic review search, you always have to prioritize recall over precision. So recall is how much of what is relevant to your topic or your research question did you find? Oops, sorry. Let's go back here. And precision is how much of what you found is relevant. And it's really important that you prioritize the recall, because if you don't do that, you will sacrifice the integrity of the review, and then it will become a very good literature review, but not a systematic review. Also, some people do get nervous when they see results from a systematic review search, because most of the results aren't going to be irrelevant to the research topic. But with a systematic review search, you should expect that, because the average precision of a systematic review search, so like how much of what you're locating is actually relevant, is like 1 to 3%. Whereas the ideal recall of a systematic review search is 100%. So that is like, you should hopefully be finding everything that is out there that answers your research question that is reasonably available to be found. So with all of these considerations, it is a good idea to document from the beginning. Um, for one thing, your search strategy is going to be recorded as part of your final product in like the Prisma diagram, and also written about in the methods section of your paper. And if you have something that got changed in the search, you have to be prepared to answer questions about that from the reviewers when you actually write the paper. So it is a good idea to take lots and lots of notes on your searches. There is a spreadsheet that is available on the systematic review guide. Rosie, if you could grab that, the link to that page from the guide. This is available in the guide. So, and we also recommend that if you use the spreadsheet, make sure you save a new version with the date each time you update it. Thanks, Rosie. I think it's on like the resources tab or something like that. I was just looking at it before we got started. So you can see the example of the file name there, search underscore 2023 dash 06 dash 08. Oh, thanks, Rosie. It's in search strategy FAQs. Um, so that example file name there is just a good data management practice. So, you know, you will accumulate so many files over the course of doing a systematic review. You need to know what is in the files when you need to go back to them 6 months or a year from now. And that should be very helpful then to see which iteration of the search is the most current or the final version of the search. Okay, so where should I search? Well, there are many prongs of an approach to a systematic review search. Most of the resources you find are probably going to be coming from database searches. Um, there's also gray literature that needs to be considered. That's usually toward the end of a review as a supplemental search. And that means that you're searching for documents and reports and things like that that are not published in traditional scholarly literature channels, so not in journals. Maybe things like randomized controlled trials or government documents or documents from a professional organization. Then you'll also have citation tracing, or what's known as snowballing. Um, so this means when you have the studies that you are going to include in your review after you have already gone through the screening for title and abstracts, you can look at all of the references lists on those studies. That's backward citation tracing, and see what sources these studies used. Maybe there's something they used that was missed elsewhere that would be helpful for you to consider for your own review. And then forward citation tracing means going and checking what the further articles were in the scholarly conversation that actually cite that paper that you're including. Like Rosie said in the chat, there are additional webinars coming up that go over these things in more detail. That's just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Hand searching, also, this is an optional method, but it involves kind of targeting a specific journal or time period and literally flipping through every page of the journal from cover to cover and making sure you haven't missed anything. That is optional. So another important thing you need to do is select your databases. There is no one database that's going to have everything you need. It just doesn't work like that. So what you end up using in your review will depend on, first of all, what you have access to. So we are bound by the limitations of what we have access to through UIC or what is freely available on the internet. And then also which databases are most relevant to your topic. So for clinical research questions, there's going to be a lot of PubMed and Embase, and they're going to be talking more about this next week. So I'm not going to go too deep into it, but for an easy example, I've worked with medical education folks who need to study something about, the curriculum of general surgery residencies. And they will also include not just medical databases, but education databases because it makes sense with what their topic is. So a librarian can always help you figure that out and decide what databases are going to be the most useful and optimal for your search. So most health sciences literature searches are going to start with PubMed/Medline. Um, Medline, you may have heard that before. All of Medline is indexed in PubMed. There are other ways to access Medline too, but we prefer PubMed. So that is usually going to be step one, and that's really what we're talking about today. So of course, you have to start with your research question. And so we have a sample research question that we have developed in the slides today. So the research question is, how do the social determinants of health impact physical activity in urban environments? So from this research question, you have to figure out what to do next, right? You can't just paste your research question into PubMed and expect to get all of the useful literature. So when we start harvesting search terms, we have to think about it in terms of concepts. So these are the concepts for the search or the research question. So the concepts that we can pull out of here are social determinants, physical activity, and urban environments. And if you plug these into something like that spreadsheet we mentioned earlier that's available on the systematic reviews guide, you're going to get something like this, where you have 3 columns and you can start building terms underneath each of your concepts. So you'll have lists eventually, but at the beginning, it's going to look like this. All right. Now I know we've already done so much and we haven't even started searching yet, but there's still a few more things to think about. So the first thing you want to do before you get started with like search terms, do a really simple search with basic keywords just to see what's out there. We know that you're not going to find everything. That's the purpose of the systematic review search. But this is helpful because it should guide you to some exemplar articles. And when we say exemplar, we mean when you think about articles that you definitely want to include in your completed review. They meet all of your inclusion criteria. You might already know of a few articles like that before you even get started. And you can search on PubMed or Google Scholar for this because you're not trying to be comprehensive with an initial scoping search like this. And the exemplars are super important to have because first of all, they will kickstart your list of search terms. And then also you should save those and test your search strings later for recall. Just the gist of that is if you think you have a really good comprehensive search, you should then see, is it pulling up my exemplar articles? And if it isn't, what am I missing? What's in here that should be in my search? Because if I'm missing this one, I may also be missing others. All right, so we're going to move on to harvesting search terms. I know I've thrown a lot at you already. So again, if you came in late, please just jot down any questions you have and save them for the end because we have quite the hefty slide deck today, but we'll use any time we have left over to answer questions. So when you're harvesting search terms, this line in red at the top, the core building blocks of a search are keywords and controlled vocabulary terms. So we'll get to controlled vocabulary terms in a second, but keywords, of course, are search terms that are descriptive of your core concepts. So most bibliographic databases will search for them in an article record. So that includes title and abstract, but not in the full text. So the full text is not even always there in every database to be able to search. So you do need to know that it's searching the title and abstract and other fields in the record, but not the full text. So you can search any word or phrase as a keyword. There are no limitations mostly, unless you're really trying to break it. But if you just like brainstorm all the ways you can think of to describe your concepts. So there's an example at the bottom for all the ways you could say teenager. Um, and the reason it's important is because you want to make sure you are using all of the common language for these terms because different authors are going to say things differently. So it's important that you're trying to get all of it because remember, this is our like fishing net search where we're trying to get everything in one search. All right, and then the next part, as noted at the top, the other core building block is controlled vocabulary terms. These are the official terms used by a database to tag major concepts in a given article. So there are specific terms too, like in PubMed and Medline, these are called mesh terms. Many databases, most databases have their own version of something like mesh terms. Um, and you know how we saw all the ways on the previous slide that you could say teenager. Um, in a controlled vocabulary terms, it is specifically one term that they have chosen to represent, like, for example, it's in PubMed, it's not heart attack, it's myocardial infarction. And then that would be used to tag all of the available literature that includes that concept in the paper. So again, it is supposed to be able to find everything regardless of what terms the authors are using when they write. And it should find all and only the literature on your topic, ideally. Well, you might be thinking, if that's the case, why do we need keywords? And the reason is that this ensures optimal recall because no system functions perfectly. Not all articles in PubMed are indexed or like tagged with mesh terms. Some will have mesh, but they haven't been indexed yet. Some might have the wrong mesh terms or incomplete mesh terms. So indexing is an automated process. So there is less of a lag time after something is published until it gets indexed, but that also means there's a greater chance of error. So that's why, especially in a systematic review where you're trying to find 100% of the literature, that you use both the controlled vocabulary terms and keywords. So moving on, how do you find these mystical controlled vocabulary terms? So if you have those exemplar articles, for example, you can look at the record in PubMed, for example, for mesh, or it might be called a subject heading or a descriptor in another database. So this, for example, link down here, this is an article that doesn't say anything about urban environments or social determinants. But then if we click on it and we go into PubMed, I'm just going to go down here and click mesh terms on the side. So you see it does have the mesh term for social determinants of health. It has some other things there that are helpful. So here's another example on the slides of an article that is tagged with social determinants of health, but the term is not in the title or the abstract. So this is one way mesh can be helpful, whereas this would not have been found if we were just using keywords. So this is how you can start harvesting your search terms and your controlled vocabulary terms. So as you are browsing, you can start copying down keywords from the title and abstract. You'll probably start to find some synonyms of, words that kind of mean the same thing as your topic, but uh, they may be slightly different. Or like it says in the second part, it might be like outdated terminology or proxy concepts. So they don't have to be exactly the same thing, as long as they fit within the same concept. If you think about an article where hypothetically the author uses that to describe it, would that still be useful to you? If so, then it goes in your concept. And you can also, so you can do this with controlled vocabulary terms like mesh as well as keywords. And you can also look at systematic reviews on similar topics. Systematic reviews should provide their search strategies that can also give you ideas. That does not mean like plagiarize their search strategy, but you can get some ideas from another review. So here's an example of another article. No, this is the same article rather, that doesn't have anything about social determinants of health in the title or abstract. But here are some examples of terms we might want to harvest from here. So neighborhood, physical activity, walking, maybe even social cohesion, depending on what specifically you are looking for. And you do have to use the official controlled vocabulary terms for the database you are searching, and they are not the same across databases. So if you were doing a PubMed search and you already had your mesh terms saved for your concepts, if you then go into Embase, which is another biomedical literature database, the controlled vocabulary terms in there are not going to be the same. Some controlled vocabularies will go more granular on a certain like area of topics. Some will be less like more broad, but it's yeah, you have to find the specific terms for each database that you're using. So in mesh terms or in PubMed, you can, of course, look at the terms that are tagged on relevant articles. So I just showed you how to do that, where you're looking at the record of the title, the abstract, all the author and journal information, and you scroll down and you click on mesh terms on the right, and then that'll jump you down to where the mesh terms are. So that's one way you can do it. You can also click on mesh database from the PubMed homepage and manually search for terms. That's okay too. Sometimes that's really helpful because you may find other related terms that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. So if we go back to our spreadsheet in progress, we have these keywords that we took from the title and abstract. And then if we look at the mesh terms on this article, we find some relevant mesh terms that we also want to save to the spreadsheet. Things like poverty, residence characteristics. Those are specific things about social determinants of health. Also, the social determinants of health general mesh term, socioeconomic factors. That's a great example of it, like not being exactly the same thing, but being close enough. And also walking, since this is a part of our research question. So we don't have a ton of time to get into this right now, but there is a specific syntax in the database where to use the mesh term, you have to have the word mesh in brackets right after the term you're using. And if you work with a librarian on, terms for your research question, we can certainly show you how to pull that out of the mesh database so you don't have to type that in manually. But within the mesh database, it's also a really good idea to look at the hierarchy for each term. So when you get to a mesh term within the mesh database, if you scroll down, you can see how these terms are categorized in different hierarchies. And Some of them will be in more than one like branch of a hierarchy. Um, this one for socioeconomic factors is important because if you search the mesh term for socioeconomic factors, it is also going to search anything below it in the tree. So if you search that, you are also searching economic factors, housing instability, poverty, low socioeconomic status. That might be okay, but it's up to you whether that matches your inclusion criteria, your research questions. So you have to make that decision on whether you want to leave that so it includes everything below it, or you can do this MH colon NOEXP. That means no explode. It's called exploding when you search everything below it. So that is another example of the very specific syntax you have to use in the database. But if you do something like that, it will retrieve only articles tagged with socioeconomic factors. It won't bring anything back that's tagged with just say poverty. Okay, so good. I forgot we had a little bit on field tags in here. Field tags are ways you can search only certain fields of the database records. So if you think of a record for an article, like if you had to fill in all of that information specifically, think of the different fields that would be in there. There would be a field for the author names, a field for the title of the article, field for the title of the journal, um, and the field for the abstract. So you can use the field tag so you're only searching something like the title and the abstract. This is way more precise. We use that very consistently in systematic review searches. It also turns off this thing PubMed does called automatic term mapping, which is where it like tries to be helpful and will, if you put in heart attack into the search bar in PubMed, it's going to automatically bring in the mesh term for myocardial infarction, which in that case would be helpful, but it can also do some really weird things that may not be intentional for you. So it's a good thing to do the field tags so you turn that off because we want to control the systematic search that we're doing so we can make it very transparent and reproducible. That is the goal. So in PubMed, mesh or MH for mesh heading, that's what you use for mesh terms. They would go right after your term and in brackets. And then TIAB, if you're searching anything as a keyword, that will make sure you're searching it only in the title and abstract. If you think about why that's important, maybe you're looking for articles on cancer and there are articles that come up and they have nothing to do with cancer and you're like, how did this even get in here? Well, maybe one of the authors is affiliated with a cancer center, and that's very common and a good example of why you want to be more precise with that. Okay, so here's our spreadsheet in progress. You can see it's getting really long now. Um, so, and yeah, oh, another great note here. So we see the bolded city keyword with title and abstract field tag under urban. So another great reason why it's a good idea to use TIAB. Same thing with the affiliation. City colleges, any college or university that has the word city, or a hospital or something like that that has the word city in it, if someone has that as their affiliation, you're going to pull that up, even though it may not actually have anything to do with an urban environment. And then when you're thinking about how many terms you should have, it depends. There are some concepts that have very narrow definitions, like, oh boy, I can say this correctly. I practiced my pronunciation. Cholecystectomy. narrow definition, right? That really only means one thing. There's not a lot of other terminology that you might put in there other than like an outdated term if there is one or something. But other terms are way squishier concepts like social determinants of health. When you think about what is a social determinant of health, it's like almost everything around you. It's hard to like make that a concise search. So that might have dozens of search terms. All right, I am going to hand it over to Rosie for the rest of the slides. And thank you.
Thanks, Emily. So now let's talk about, we have these lists of terms that correspond to each of our concepts. So maybe a population, an intervention, and an outcome. And now we need to know how to put it all together in one single search string. So rather than doing multiple searches where we're testing different combinations of these terms, we're going to put them all together into one string so that we have one single reproducible search to publish in our paper. So the way we're going to make that happen is with Boolean operators. Boolean operators are the words and, or, and not. We're going to talk about not in a couple minutes. For now, let's talk about and or. You put and in between each of your separate concepts. So for example, in between physical activity, the concept, and urban, we want to tell the database that we only want articles that talk about both of those things. So we're going to separate those search terms with and. So we only get the overlap. For or, we're going to use that to connect terms that describe the same concept. For example, urban or cities. So we want to tell PubMed, we want to see all the articles that have the word urban in the title or abstract, all the articles that have the word cities, or if they have both, that would be fine too. So that's what we're using or for, is within the same concept. We're connecting those words with or. Let's talk about a few additional tools that you can use within databases to sort of finesse your search. The first one is truncation, which you can use in PubMed. This is an asterisk that you add on to the root of a word to search for all the alternate endings of that word. So for example, Emily gave us that teenager example before. If we type into PubMed TEEN with an asterisk, we'll find teen, teens, teenage, teenagers, etc. Anything that starts with those four letters. We won't find alternate like synonyms. So it's not going to automatically bring back adolescent. It has to start with those letters. And in PubMed, the root has to be at least four letters to do truncation. So we couldn't do TEE asterisk. When you're developing your search, try it with truncation, try it without. Sometimes using truncation is going to bring noise into your search, and it's more precise and more efficient to just search various iterations of the word. You don't have to use this, is what I'm trying to say. But, you know, play around with it and see if anything gets brought in that you wouldn't have otherwise caught, or if there's, you know, 17 different ways to say a word, you might find it useful to use truncation. We're not going to use this with controlled vocabulary, which is our mesh terms. Because mesh terms, there's only one official term that PubMed uses for a certain concept. So the mesh term for teenagers is adolescence. It's not going to be adolescence with a CE. It's not going to be any variation of that word. It's always going to be written the same. So you don't use truncation with the mesh terms. If you want to search, no, thank you. Next slide, that's fine. If you want to search two or more words as an exact phrase, meaning you only want to find where they show up right next to one another in a title or abstract, you're going to put double quotation marks around that phrase. So we're going to search that as a bound phrase. For example, green space or green spaces. We don't want to find articles that have green in the author affiliation and space in the abstract. We only want to find those words right next to one another So we're putting it in double quotes. And this also turns off that term mapping feature that Emily was talking about. So we're telling PubMed to search only exactly the word that we're typing in. And finally, proximity searching. This is relatively new in PubMed, but this is a way to search for two words within a certain number of words of one another. You can do this in the title field, which is TI, or you can do it in the title abstract field, TIAB. So the way you'll do this, and I use the social determinants phrase as an example, I put social determinants in quotes, and then my field tag, I put TIAB colon, and then I don't know if we'd call that a tilde. What do we call that? Squiggly. In my mind, I call it a squiggly, and a 3. So that means I'm looking for those two words within 3 words of one another. So it'll get me social determinants, the exact phrase. It'll get me social and commercial determinants of health. So when we have those words with a couple in between, and then it'll also get me those words even when they're in the reverse order. So determinants first and then social. And I'm putting a link in the chat. We have a research guide that was just finalized today. It's got some guides for different databases that shows you how to use truncation, wildcards, proximity searching, and phrase searching in each of these databases if you'd like to use that as a reference. If you want to see more about what exactly PubMed is doing with the terms that you type in, you can click on the advanced link that shows up under the search bar in PubMed, and the advanced search screen will show you your full prior search history, which, side note, is useful when you're doing a systematic review because you can download it as an Excel sheet rather than taking time to copy and paste searches. If you want to just save everything you did today, all the search terms you tried, you can download it as a CSV, and then you'll have that for your documentation. But also you'll notice next to each of my searches, I have a number. So I have search number 1, search number 2, and then outlined in red there is a little arrow that indicates search details. And the next slide shows what happens when you click on that arrow. It will expand to show you really what PubMed is doing behind the scenes. So in that search number 1, which gave us 45,000 results, we just typed in social determinants of health with no quotes and no field tags. What it does then is it maps to the social determinants of health mesh term, or it looks in all fields for all of those words separately or where they appear as a phrase. And that gets us 45,000 results. If we search social determinants of health, the mesh term, or social determinants of health as a bound phrase in all fields, that cuts the results in half. So we're going from 45,000 down to less than 23,000. So this is, when you're doing an average search, it might not really make a difference. These searches are bringing in a lot of the same articles. But when you're dealing with a systematic review search, paying attention to things like this, and I would even add title abstract after that second term in search number 2. If you pay attention to things like this, it can really help you eliminate a lot of the noise in your search, make your search more precise, and help you zero in on just the literature that's relevant to you. So it can make the difference, like using field tags and using phrase searching can take your results sometimes from 5,000 down to 1,000, or, it can make a big difference. So it's important to pay attention to that kind of stuff. So this is what happens when I take Emily's spreadsheet with 3 lovely columns of terms, and I use everything I just talked about to put it all together. So we've got, in different colors, we have each of our 3 concepts. So each column of that spreadsheet translates to one of these search blocks. The first one being the social determinants term, and the official mesh terms that I've confirmed are mesh. I have MESH in brackets behind them. And then the rest I'm searching in the TIAB title abstract field. I'm searching social determinants within 3 words of one another. And you'll notice all of those red terms, my social determinants words, are separated by or. Then I have and the physical activity concept, Same thing, a combination of title, abstract, keywords, and mesh terms, and urban or cities, city planning, urban population, etc. So we have three concepts, we have two ands, and then within each of those concepts, we're using or. Next slide, thank you. So I have that, I'm considering that my draft search. I have a pretty good sense that this is what I want to do. So I'm going to plug it into PubMed and start looking at the first few pages of results. I'm going to sort it by most recent, not by the best match, which is the relevance sort. This is going to give me the best sense of what's out there, as opposed to if you're looking at the database sorting by relevance or best match, it's going to push stuff up that already has all your keywords in it that you're already searching for. And what we're doing now is looking for keywords that we don't have. So I'm going to look through the first 20, 50, 100 abstracts, however many I have time for. And the stuff that's coming up, are there additional title and abstract terms that are not in my spreadsheet, but that will retrieve, that relate to my concepts? They're going to retrieve relevant literature for me. I'm going to go back and add them to my spreadsheet and therefore add them to my search. So this is where I'm starting to finesse my search before I get it finalized. If there are way too many results, this is where sometimes you need to go back to is there a single term that's just bringing in way too many results that I'm searching in all fields that maybe I need to limit to certain fields? Or is there a mesh term that is exploding? So I'm including all of the narrower terms when really it might be worth going back and just searching individual mesh terms out of that tree or that hierarchy to improve the precision. But again, if you are doing a search and you have 14,000 results and you don't know what to do next, that's where it would be a good idea, I think, to make an appointment with a librarian and we can kind of talk about what your options are. Is there a way to finesse the search down, or are you going to maybe have to go back and narrow your research question? Okay, so I mentioned that third Boolean operator, which is not. Really, the only time we ever use not in a systematic review search is to test new terms. So what I mean by that is I have my search draft, which I'm using as like my anchor. So I know this is at least what I'm using as my beginning search. And then I'm going through my results and I see a new term. I see active transport and active transportation. So I probably want to see those articles that adding active transport, if they have that term, I probably want to see those articles too. So I'm going to add that to my search. I'm going to add it to my draft string and see what new results it brings in. So this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but it's really helpful when you're doing this kind of searching. My first search is that draft I showed you earlier. It gets me 5,698 results. In search number 2, highlighted in red is that new term that I want to test. So the searches are exactly the same, except in number 2, I'm adding in or active transport, active transportation. That gets me 5,715 results, which is 17 more. If I want to see are any of those relevant, what I can do then is go back to my advanced screen in PubMed and type in number 2, not number 1, that search number that appears next to the search, and then it'll isolate out those 17. So I can look at them and see, are these relevant? Are they not? Or is this term being used in some way that's not helpful to me? In this case, it's 17 out of 5,000 results. I'd probably leave it in either way, but sometimes you'll add in a term and it brings in like 400. And, we really want to make sure that this term is actually going to be helpful before we decide to include it in our search or not. Yeah, that can be really useful. Wow, and well, I love Eric. I love your comments in the chat. It's really motivating me. But yeah, it really is a helpful way to refine your search.
I showed that to someone in a consultation once and they said it was like magic. So I
It feels
appreciate
like
your
it sometimes,
reaction.
yeah. So then when I'm adding terms to my search, when I get to kind of a stopping point again with my draft search, I'm going to look for those exemplar articles. Emily talked back at the beginning about I have anywhere from 2 or 3 to 10 or more articles that I know, like these are articles that I would definitely want to see in my search. So I'm going to check, first of all, are these articles in PubMed? If so, they should appear in my search. If not, why not? What are the terms in that article that I don't have that I need to add into my search to bring in those exemplar articles? So again, the librarians are happy to help you if you want help kind of walking through how to do that. I'll wrap up here, but database limiters, when you're looking at your PubMed filters, there can be a temptation to start clicking the stuff on the left, article types, full text availability, dates, language, stuff like that. Really, it's considered a no-no in systematic review searching to use those filters. They're highly specific. They're often going to include stuff that you actually want to see. So stuff that is a false negative, if you will, it's gonna exclude it, but I wanted to see it. And that's because only the articles that are indexed have those tags on them. Um, you don't have to remember what that means. Just don't use them if you're doing a systematic review search. If you go back through the slides, I'd recommend you check out these two tools. We don't have time to look into them today. Pub Reminder is a tool where you can plug in your search string or a particular term. It'll run a PubMed search and it'll pull out the words that are showing up most often. So it'll, like, if I have a search of 100 articles, it'll tell me which mesh terms appear most often among those articles. And then Yale Mesh Analyzer is another tool that's similar. If you have those exemplar articles, you can pull out the PMID numbers, the PubMed ID numbers, and it'll make a nice little table for you of the mesh terms and keywords that are tagged on those articles. Okay, so in a minute, I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll take some questions, but just a couple of things here. Next week is part 2 of this. This week and next week really function as 2 halves of a whole. We're going to be talking about how to take that PubMed search. Once you finalize that, how do you translate it to other databases? As Emily mentioned, there's different syntaxes, different field tags, different controlled vocabularies. They're not going to use mesh. They're going to use their own thing. So how do we do that so we have essentially the same search in every database? The slides and recording for today will be sent out to you by this Friday. And then if you want to go ahead and either click the link that I'm putting in the chat or use your phone to snap the QR code, this is our evaluation form for today's webinar. We would really appreciate you letting us know what you thought and any questions that might still remain for you.
Yes, thank
I'll
you.
leave that up here and stop the recording, and then we'll take your questions.